Good evening, and welcome to Eerie Echoes. Tonight, we descend into the misty peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, lands where every stone holds a story and every shadow hides a secret. These are not just legends, but true fears, lived and told by real witnesses. Turn off the lights, and remember, the mountains never forget, and they never forgive. Locals call it Snakehead Road, a narrow stretch of cracked asphalt that winds through the hollows of Harlan County. No streetlights, no shoulder to pull over, just thick woods pressing in from both sides, their branches knotting overhead like black veins against the night sky. I had taken the road before during the day. It was unsettling then, but at least the sunlight gave it edges. At night, it felt like driving into a tunnel with no end. I was heading home late after visiting a friend. The radio barely worked out here. Just faint static mixed with the occasional warble of a distant country station. My headlights cut two thin paths through the dark, catching glimpses of tree trunks and the glint of wet asphalt from a passing shower. About halfway down the road, I noticed something strange in my mirrors. Another pair of headlights, far back, but getting closer. At first, I was relieved. Having another car nearby felt less lonely. But as I rounded a bend, the lights didn't follow the curve. They stayed perfectly aligned behind me, even though the road twisted like a coiled snake. The hair on my neck prickled. I pressed the gas a little harder. The engine whined. The tires hummed against the cracked pavement. But no matter how fast I went, the lights stayed the same distance away. Too close to be casual, too far to make out the car. Then, without warning, they surged forward. The glow filled my rear view, so bright it washed out the interior of my car. I blinked hard, squinting into the mirror, but there was nothing there. No headlights, no car, just darkness. I slowed, heart hammering, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. That's when the smell hit me. An acrid, burnt scent, like overheated metal and coal smoke. It seeped into the car, heavy and choking. In the beam of my headlights, the asphalt shimmered ahead, and I saw it. Two perfect circles burned into the road, the edges glowing faintly as if still hot. I swerved around them, and when I looked back in the mirror, the headlights were back. Only now they were right on my bumper, impossibly close. I floored it, the car rattling over the broken pavement. The lights didn't fade. They just blinked out. One instant there, the next, gone. When I finally reached the main road, I pulled over under the glow of a gas station light, shaking. The back of my car was warm to the touch, too warm. And in the dust on the trunk, someone had drawn two circles. Summersville Lake is deep, deeper than it looks from the shore. Locals say there's a whole town down there, flooded when the dam was built in the 60s. Streets, buildings, even a church steeple, all buried under dark water. I had come to the lake in late autumn, when the tourists were gone and the air carried the first bite of winter. My cabin sat on a bluff overlooking the shoreline, the water stretching black and still under a pale moon. On my second night, I woke to an odd glow outside. Not moonlight, not the reflection of a boat. This was deeper, coming from beneath the surface of the lake itself. I stepped outside, the air sharp in my lungs. Down by the water, the glow pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. It was steady, hypnotic. Without really thinking, I followed the narrow trail to the shore. The closer I got, the more I realized how quiet it was. No wind, no insects. Not even the gentle slap of water on the rocks. The lake was holding its breath. At the edge, I crouched, staring into the black water. Shapes began to emerge in the glow. Walls, outlines of rooftops, the unmistakable spire of a church steeple, and moving between them, shadows. Human shapes, gliding slowly, their forms distorted by the rippling light. One of them turned its head toward me. Even from the shore, I could feel the weight of its gaze. The glow grew brighter, spreading across the surface until it lit the trees behind me. My reflection vanished, replaced by a pale, eyeless face staring up from the water. I stumbled back, tripping on the rocks. The light dimmed instantly, swallowed by the black. The lake returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened. When I finally turned to head back to the cabin, I noticed my boots were wet, but I hadn't stepped into the water. The road to Spruce Knob is a winding strip of asphalt that climbs higher and higher into the mountains, the kind where the forest leans in from both sides, and the night feels thicker than the air itself. I had driven it before in daylight, when the sky was clear and the view stretched out for miles. But that night, the fog was so heavy it swallowed my headlights before they reached the trees. The deeper I drove, the quieter everything became. The hum of the engine seemed to sink into the mist. Even the gravel under my tires sounded muted. I kept my eyes fixed on the narrow ribbon of road ahead, hands tight on the wheel. That's when I saw him. Just a figure in the fog, tall, shoulders slightly hunched, wearing a long, dark coat that looked decades out of place. His outline wavered, not from movement, but from the thickness of the mist. My first thought was that maybe he was lost, or his car had broken down. I slowed, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. But as my headlights touched him, he was gone. Not stepped aside, not faded, just gone. I let the car roll forward, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the fog. But then, in my rearview mirror, something moved. In the faint glow of the dashboard lights, I saw him again, sitting in the back seat, perfectly still. His coat draped over his knees, his head angled slightly down, where a face should have been. There was nothing, just pale, blank skin. My breath caught. I jerked my head around, but the seat was empty. The fog thickened, pressing against the windshield like wet cotton. The road felt endless. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. And then, the sound in the car changed. I couldn't hear the engine anymore. Couldn't hear the tires, only a slow, steady breathing. When the cabin finally came into view, its porch light glowing faintly through the haze, I didn't waste a second. I pulled in hard, slammed the gear into park, and bolted for the door. Inside, the warmth of the fire should have been comforting. But when I looked back toward the driveway, it was empty. And yet, on the inside of the window right beside my face, a single handprint slid slowly down the glass. Black Mountain rises above the Carolina landscape like the spine of some ancient creature, its ridges jagged and its slopes wrapped in endless pine. Near the summit, hidden behind a thicket of rhododendrons, stands an old fire tower, its steel frame rusting, its steps groaning under the weight of time. I had heard about it from a park ranger who spoke in that half-joking, half-serious tone people use when they're not sure they want you to believe them. He said no one went up there after dark, not since the voices. Of course, that was enough to make me want to see it for myself. I started the climb just before sunset, the trail winding steeply through a forest that seemed to darken faster than the sky. By the time I reached the clearing, the fire tower was a silhouette against the fading orange light. Its windows were gone, leaving only jagged frames. The first step I took onto the metal staircase made the whole structure tremble. My hand clung to the cold railing as I ascended, each creak echoing too loudly in the silence. Halfway up, the wind changed. It carried with it a sound, faint, but clear enough to stop me in my tracks. Whispers. At first, it was like hearing two people speaking far off in the woods. But as I climbed, they grew sharper, closer, until it felt like someone was speaking directly into my ear. The words were too fast, tumbling over each other, in a language I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. By the time I reached the top platform, the last light of day had drained from the horizon. Below me, the forest was an unbroken sea of black. The air was colder here, almost icy. And then, the whispers stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own breathing. Then, from the corner of the platform, came a new sound, slow footsteps on metal. But I was alone. I turned toward the staircase just as the air shifted again. This time, the whispers returned, but they weren't distant. They were inside my head. A dozen voices, maybe more, all speaking at once. Some angry, some pleading. One, a woman's voice, repeating the same phrase over and over, so close it felt like her lips were at my ear. I stumbled toward the stairs, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles ached. As I descended, the voices grew louder, more desperate, until they seemed to be following me down. When my boots hit the ground, everything went silent. I didn't look back as I left the clearing, but as I reached the tree line, I heard the faint groan of the tower's steps, as if someone had just started to climb down. Mingo County carries a smell in winter that never quite leaves your clothes, a faint mix of damp earth and the ghost of coal smoke from decades past. My uncle's cabin sat in a narrow valley there, hemmed in by steep hills that blocked most of the wind. It was the kind of place where sound traveled strangely, sometimes carrying clear across the hollow, other times swallowed whole by the trees. I had gone to stay with him after a long stretch of city life had worn me down. Nights there were dark in a way I'd almost forgotten. No glow from distant streetlights, no hum of traffic, just the black outline of the hills against a star-pocked sky. On my third night, I woke to the smell, stronger than usual, acrid, like fresh coal being burned in a stove that was too hot. I figured my uncle had stoked the fire, but when I got up, the cabin was empty. Outside, the valley was drowned in a low-hanging mist that hugged the ground like it didn't want to leave. The smell of coal smoke was everywhere, thick enough to taste. Through the haze, I saw them. A cluster of lights, faint and flickering, like lanterns swaying in an unseen breeze. They were moving slowly along the old mining road that cut through the far side of the valley. I'd hiked there earlier that week. It was nothing but collapsed shafts and rusted equipment. No reason for anyone to be out there in the dead of night. I grabbed my jacket and started toward them, boots sinking into the frost-hardened ground. The closer I got, the stranger the air felt, heavy, almost charged. The figures came into view then, miners. At least they looked like miners, helmets with lamps, soot-darkened faces, shoulders hunched under invisible weight. They moved in silence, tools in hand, eyes fixed on the ground in front of them. I called out, but not one turned their head. The air between us shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt. The coal smoke was suffocating now. One of them finally stopped. Slowly, he lifted his head. His face was blank, not expressionless, blank. Smooth skin where eyes and mouth should have been, the coal dust clinging to nothing. The lanterns flickered violently, and in that strobe of dim light, they were gone. All of them. The valley was empty again. When I stumbled back to the cabin, my uncle was sitting by the cold fireplace. He didn't look at me when he spoke, just stared at the dark hearth. "Don't follow the lights here," he said quietly. "They're still working the mine, and it's been closed for 60 years. In the heart of the Great Smoky Mountains lies a stretch of road the locals call the Road of Spirits. On the map, it's just an unmarked service route, winding through dense forest and skirting the edge of old Cherokee burial grounds. But everyone in town knows the stories. People vanish there. Cars stall without reason. Some say you can hear voices in the wind. I had been photographing fall foliage all day and decided to take a shortcut back to my motel. My GPS drew a thin gray line that cut across the mountains, this road. The entrance was easy to miss, a narrow gap in the trees, the asphalt cracked and choked with moss. The canopy overhead closed in quickly, swallowing what little daylight remained. My headlights barely pierced the shadows, and the deeper I went, the thicker the air felt. Heavy, humid, almost electric. About 10 minutes in, the radio flickered to life. No station, no music, just static. Then, under the static, a voice. Soft, slow, speaking in a language I didn't understand. I turned the dial, but the voice stayed, threading through the noise. That's when I saw movement ahead. Figures standing along the roadside. Tall, thin, dressed in what looked like old, tattered garments. They didn't move, didn't react as my car rolled past. Each one had its head tilted slightly, as if listening. The road narrowed and the trees pressed closer. My rearview mirror caught something. Those same figures, but now they were walking, keeping pace with the car. Their feet didn't seem to touch the ground. A sharp curve came, and for a moment the road opened to a small clearing. I could see the outline of a wooden archway, standing over a path that led into the forest. Hanging from the arch were dozens of small bundles, each wrapped in cloth and tied with string. The wind stirred them gently, and a low, mournful sound rose, like 100 whispers blending into one. The figures stopped at the edge of the clearing. I didn't. I pressed the accelerator until the road spat me out onto the main highway, my chest tight, my hands gripping the wheel so hard they ached. When I finally glanced in the mirror, the road behind me was empty. But faintly, in the air vents of my car, I could still hear that voice, whispering in a language I didn't know, yet somehow understood. My grandfather's land stretched out far into the quiet hills of Logan County. Most of it was forest, oak and hickory so dense that daylight felt like an afterthought. But at the far edge, past the rusted barbed wire fence and a patch of stubborn blackberry bramble, stood the old coal shed. He told me no one had used it in decades. His voice always lowered when he mentioned it, as if the trees themselves might overhear. The wood was stained black from years of coal dust and rain. The roof sagged like a tired spine, and the door leaned inward, as though it didn't want to be opened. One humid afternoon, curiosity outweighed caution. The air grew still the closer I got, as if the forest had stopped breathing. My hand met the warped wood of the door. It felt colder than it should have, like stone kept in shadow. It gave way with a reluctant creak. Inside, the smell was thick. Coal dust and mildew clung to every breath. Shadows pooled in the corners, swallowing the light that dared to enter. And there against the far wall stood a clock. Not the kind you hang on a wall, but a tall grandfather clock. Its glass face was fogged with age, its brass pendulum still. The hands were frozen at exactly midnight. I stepped closer, boots crunching on scattered coal. My fingertips hovered over the glass, but the air shifted. It cooled in an instant, the hair rising on my arms. The clock's hands began to move, slowly, deliberately. Tick, tick, until they rested at 12:01. A sound scraped behind me. Something heavy dragged across the floor. My chest tightened. I turned sharply, but the door was closed. I hadn't touched it. The ticking grew faster, the rhythm tightening like a heartbeat on the edge of panic. The shadows in the corners seemed to lean forward as if listening. My pulse roared in my ears, matching the tempo of that frantic ticking. With every step toward the door, the air thickened. It felt like pushing through water. I forced the handle, the wood groaning in protest, and stumbled into the daylight. Silence. Not even birdsong. I glanced back once. Through the narrow crack of the half-closed door, the clock's hands were moving backwards. That night, my grandfather didn't ask where I'd been. He just sat by the kitchen window, staring toward the tree line, and said one thing. If you ever hear it ticking again, don't look at the time. Summersville Lake is deep, deeper than it looks from the shore. Locals say there's a whole town down there, flooded when the dam was built in the 60s. Streets, buildings, even a church steeple, all buried under dark water. I had come to the lake in late autumn, when the tourists were gone and the air carried the first bite of winter. My cabin sat on a bluff overlooking the shoreline, the water stretching black and still under a pale moon. On my second night, I woke to an odd glow outside. Not moonlight, not the reflection of a boat. This was deeper, coming from beneath the surface of the lake itself. I stepped outside, the air sharp in my lungs. Down by the water, the glow pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. It was steady, hypnotic. Without really thinking, I followed the narrow trail to the shore. The closer I got, the more I realized how quiet it was. No wind, no insects, not even the gentle slap of water on the rocks. The lake was holding its breath. At the edge, I crouched, staring into the black water. Shapes began to emerge in the glow. Walls, outlines of rooftops, the unmistakable spire of a church steeple, and moving between them, shadows. Human shapes, gliding slowly, their forms distorted by the rippling light. One of them turned its head toward me. Even from the shore, I could feel the weight of its gaze. The glow grew brighter, spreading across the surface until it lit the trees behind me. My reflection vanished, replaced by a pale, eyeless face staring up from the water. I stumbled back, tripping on the rocks. The light dimmed instantly, swallowed by the black. The lake returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened. When I finally turned to head back to the cabin, I noticed my boots were wet. But I hadn't stepped into the water.